It sounded better to me. Today we're going to be talking about repurposing old drugs against COVID-19. We've got a lot of drugs out there. You would think that there would be some that would help, and we've already been there in terms of some of these things like hydroxychloroquine, Remdesivir, and now the steroids a couple of weeks ago. So some very interesting perspectives on those. But why aren't there more, and why don't we have better information? Well, we'll get into some of those details and some of those topics. That's what today's all about. The previous topics that we've covered, if you have an interest: stem cells, possible cure for diabetes; saturated fats, the whole big fat surprise. Covered a lot of Nina Teicholz's book, and some new information, that a new article, a meta-analysis, a literature science review from, believe it or not, JACC. Who's JACC? The Journal of the American College of Cardiology. And as you start getting into that, what they're saying is, you know what, despite decades of hating on saturated fats, the real science doesn't support that the supposition, the reality that we've had for decades, that they are bad for you. So it's a very interesting article, and we'd love for you to take a look at it if you have an interest. It's a great book if you've got time to read 500 pages. Diagnosing type 1 and type 2 diabetes, that's more of a niche topic for people they're interested. But one of the things it does is it helps you understand type 1 and type 2 diabetes are totally different diseases. Type 1, the initial injury is your own body. It takes friendly fire. The beta cells in your pancreas take friendly fire from your immune system, and they get wiped out and damaged. They can't make insulin anymore. That's very different from what 90% of us have. And again, it gets to 80 and 90% of us as we get into our 60s and 70s. We have damage to our pancreas just because it's getting worn out, fighting against aging insulin receptors in the cell walls of mostly the liver and the muscle cells. So that's why we have to get into some of the things that we do with managing our lifestyle, managing carbs, managing our exercise regimens, making sure that we get plenty of exercise during the week, making sure that we get that we maintain our muscle mass. So need to be doing high intensity intervals, resistance training. Those were the things that were demonstrated in a clinical trial by Mayo Clinic to actually have a huge impact. Number one was HIIT, high intensity intervals, and number two was resistance training. Aerobics was in there, but not as strong. And I'm talking about for 60, 70, and 80-year-olds, not just for 30-year-olds. So this is a very, very important topic. Maybe the most important in terms of viewership in this channel is, can we reduce plaque buildup in our arteries? And of course you can. It's not as simple and as easy as you might think. And just like everything else, you need to understand a little bit more of the details. Talked about fiber, whether it's worth it or not, and we got into some other issues as well. As we've mentioned many times, we've got, if you want to get deeper in terms of any of our programs, there are a lot of different ways to do it. This is my third retirement, and my focus in this time period is to help people understand what's killing us, what's disabling us. Number one cause of death is heart attack. Number one cause of disability is stroke. The same thing causes those. It's plaque, cardiovascular inflammation, and 80%, 85% of that is due to this one thing: insulin resistance and inflammation. So there are ways that you can get this information, and you don't have to pay $5,000 or even $1,000. I mean, you've got very affordable options here now in terms of learning what's going on with your own body. The update on the book, we are getting close. We've been working with a professional author and a professional in terms of just this entire book space. We're getting close to taking, moving back, stepping back a little bit and developing this for one of the major publication houses. And here's the trade-off when you start getting into that discussion. If you go quicker, I mean, if you go self-publication, you can move quicker. Self-publication is looked down upon by a lot of the, you know, the authoring community, but you got a lot more control. Again, you can get it out there for a defined, known audience such as we have. On the other hand, if you want to get a bigger readership, wider acceptance, bigger understanding, more people seeing this, then it does work a lot better to go ahead, slow it down a little bit, let one of the big houses take it over. So we're still in the midst of that discussion. We'll keep you posted. Talking about webinars, supplements is a big deal for a lot of our folks. As you know, we say it time and time and time again. Supplements can be very important. You cannot supplement your way out of a lifestyle problem, just like you can't medicate or surgerize or stent or bypass your way out of a lifestyle problem. If you need to lose 30 pounds, none of those things are going to fix that. But supplements can help, just like those other things can as well. The subscription plans, we've got more and more people interested in these. They're a great way to get the basics of making sure that you know what's going on in terms of your own health, watching your own health, and even getting evaluations, but not breaking the bank at any one time period. Making sure that we just do that on a regular basis. The gang is very proud of the fact that they've sort of finished our new website. It's prevmedhealth.com. But they've been doing a lot of work on it. It looks a lot better than the old ugly one. It's still got some problems, but again, it's a lot better shape than what we had before. So when Carl gives us after Carl gives us the water ball, we'll go into the major program. So there's a young doctor, Dr. David Feigenbaum. He has gotten focused in terms of doing a more systematic review on the drugs that exist out there and what they can or maybe cannot do in terms of helping with, guess what? Coronavirus, COVID-19. He's young, he's 35 years old. He's an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Perelman School of Medicine. He leads the school's Center for Cytokine Storm Treatment and the laboratory. We got this article that we're covering from CNN. So you may have seen it. If you haven't, there's the link right there. You can take a look at it. He's been a patient himself. He has an immune problem called Castleman's disease. It nearly claimed his life. So this is a unique space, and it's very much related to some issues that he's dealt with himself. Now, cytokine storm. During a cytokine storm, the body's overactive immune response begins to attack its own cells rather than just the virus. That, for a lot of people, that's been the killer in terms of COVID-19. When that inflammatory response occurs in COVID-19 patients, the cytokines are the culprit. Often the culprit for severe lung damage, organ failure, blood clots, and as you know, the blood clots result in loss of life, loss of legs, loss of toes, loss of brain tissue, and pneumonia that kills them. The young actor, I think he was in his late 30s, early 40s, Broadway actor that was otherwise healthy that got COVID-19, was lost a leg, was going to have to get a lung transplant, ended up dying. Most of you know that, but some of you don't. So again, devastating disease for the young as well as the old. One of the major questions is how much of this is just more for old people and people with comorbidities. That's one of the things that's not so clear when you start looking through the news, you start looking at the articles in it. So let's get back to the topic for today, though. The topic is repurposing old drugs to fight similar symptoms caused by SARS-CoV-2. It's become a global imperative, obviously, and again, that's what Dr. David Feigenbaum is doing. After seeing how the same cytokine storm kills both Castleman and the COVID-19 patients alike, Dr. Feigenbaum's lab devoted all of its resources to aiding doctors to fight the pandemic. His team reviewed published data on 150 plus drugs, which have been used to treat nearly 50,000 COVID-19 patients. They published their findings in a database called Corona, a COVID-19 registry of off-label and new agents, to help doctors treat patients and tell researchers how to build clinical trials. Corona dovetails with the FDA's ongoing work. For years, FDA has been developing the Cure ID app to help healthcare providers capture novel uses of already approved drugs. There are no old vaccines on the shelf waiting to be dusted. As we've covered vaccines, that's a huge topic. I'm going to go off script for just a second and mention this point. There's been a lot of discussion regarding the vaccine and what is the timing. You've heard it many times from folks like Tony Fauci that it's 18 months minimum. That's what it's always been. But there was a recent interview of the director of the NIH, Francis Collins, and his view was much more like what mine has been, that we're thinking more like a significant improvement, as in maybe even January. If you have an interest on the vaccines, there are hundreds of vaccines that are being evaluated, that are being developed right now, and there are several different mechanisms. Actually, half a dozen different mechanisms that a vaccine might work. Let's don't think that it's going to be a year and a half. Let's start thinking more towards maybe January. Anyhow. If you have more interest in the vaccines question, just go to YouTube, look up my name, look up COVID-19 vaccines, and you'll see we covered that issue. So, with massive amounts of patients, clinical data has been bearing out a few noticeable items. COVID-19 patients with more severe cytokine storms do need drugs targeted towards suppressing the immune system. Those with fewer cytokine storm problems were more likely to benefit from immune boosting drugs. So you begin to see that this is a difficult dance for the medical community, or a balance trying to say, okay, we're going to provide some slowing down, immunosuppression when we need it, or immunoboosting when we need that. And sometimes it's difficult enough to know which is needed when, and sometimes it's even more difficult than that. Sometimes both are needed. Some components of the immune system need to be suppressed, while other components of the immune system need to be boosted. So again, hopefully that helps explain some of the challenges in treating this disease. Outside of drugs designed to boost or suppress the immune system, another major category is antivirals. A few drugs that stand out in that area: lopinavir, ritonavir, remdesivir. Got a lot of good press a couple of months ago. As of mid-June, the team looked at papers on the drug, on that drug pairing more than 4,500 patients. Corticosteroids have been shown particularly promising. As I mentioned in the intro to this, there was a great article coming out of the UK. You know, they actually did a pre-release, as so many have done during the age of COVID. That pre-release process has really been a challenge for the scientists, because when we say pre-release, you know, the standard is to get something reviewed by our peers, and then if it goes past peer review, at that point publish. Well, that peer review takes time. So like this group, with the UK information on dexamethasone, they had a challenge. They went ahead and submitted it for, submitted the article, the write-up on what they were doing on dexamethasone for review and publication. However, they had, and they shared this in some other articles, they had the human issue, the human trial of, I've got information which clearly indicates it could save maybe thousands of lives, while they're taking the time to do peer review. So do I release this to the world with the full risk that it may turn out to be wrong? We might have made a mistake. Or do we say, no, we're going to hold it until it's totally peer reviewed and run the risk of maybe tens of thousands of people dying that might have been saved associated with the ability to use this drug? So that conundrum, that challenge is happening over and over and over again in this pandemic. The anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine, it became popular early on. In the published studies, the drug hasn't really done as well as it looked like. So again, that's another example of going ahead, getting that information out there earlier, getting more use of that drug, and maybe not being that helpful. One of the questions that you would have as you examine this process is, well, was it hurtful? Did we hurt a lot of people with a lot of inappropriate or too much hydroxychloroquine? I don't think that we did. Hydroxychloroquine is not a harmless drug, but again, I think in terms of the comparison, we could have handled it better. We can always handle it better, but again, different issue, different topic. I'll move on back to what we're talking about, the program today. What are some of the challenges in terms of this, some other challenges in terms of managing this process of taking old medications that we've used for other diseases and trying them for this one? Because COVID-19 is so new, many of the studies are observational or anecdotal. These types of studies obviously matter as scientists are building a foundation of knowledge. While the best insights come from running double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, one shortfall is that many of the published studies just don't have the level of rigor to inform larger-scale scientific decision-making. So as you see, slapdash is one of the words that comes to you. You're in a hurry, you're trying to save lives. Meanwhile, you're trying to collect this information to see if this is really working. It takes time, attention to detail, and a lot of focus on the quality of the study design and the study execution to get good information. It's a huge juggling act to be a healthcare provider managing patients that are dying from this disease, and meanwhile, on the side, try to juggle doing good studies in this space. There's also the problem of basing a drug's success only on the time the virus leaves the body. This is a unique issue for, there are other viruses that you have this with, but this is a unique issue for this specific virus. If the virus took a long time to leave the patient's bodies, it could suggest that the drug was slow to take effect, or that other factors, including the patient's own immune system, played a larger role in expelling the pathogen. On the other hand, or the virus. On the other hand, what that may mean is that that drug actually beat down the virus and its impact short term, so the body could survive that short-term cytokine storm, that short-term major focus of infection, so the body could take more time to deal with it. Carl, are you able to show this video?
Yes, Doc. The other one though. The last.
Okay.
These could be the heroes. Old drugs put to new use. researchers are working hard to test existing drugs for their effectiveness against COVID-19. Currently, the main drugs being tested are antiviral drugs, those originally developed to combat HIV, Ebola, or hepatitis C. One is particularly promising, Remdesivir. The antiviral agent is similar to a building block of the coronavirus and inhibits its replication.
So I think there's cautious optimism that this is a drug that has some level of effect, but at the very beginning now to understand how are we going to use this? Are we going to actually have to give this to patients that are less sick? Do we have to treat earlier? Will we use it in combinations?
Originally developed for the treatment of Ebola, Remdesivir has not yet been officially approved anywhere. However, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has granted it special approval, and now it may be used to treat individual patients in the U.S. Why? An initial clinical study had shown that while taking the drug only led to a minimally lower mortality rate of COVID-19 patients, it did appear to shorten recovery time by several days.
For a lot of viral diseases, we actually use combinations of drugs, and those are effective. So if you have two drugs that are moderately effective and you combine them, maybe they are very effective. So a lot of those questions have not been answered yet.
The situation is urgent, with almost 300,000 people succumbing to the virus so far worldwide. However, clinical studies do give reason for optimism.
So thank you, Carl. As you can see from the separator there, we're going from the program into the Q&A section. It starts off with a comment from Joe Riley, ZV1, 96% and 57 beats per minute. Good morning, Joe. Joe's been working with me on helping me through a glitch. When we start getting a lot of comments, sometimes the comments will just flip up through the scroll up, and I'll miss a lot of them. We missed a bunch of them, about 10 minutes worth a couple of weeks ago. So Joe's been helping me out, and hopefully we'll get there where we can. The goal is to comment or to acknowledge all the comments. See if we can at least give you some response if I'm able, it's in my knowledge base. One other thing, Joe, I sent you a text earlier this morning to see if you'd have any interest in helping out with the forum. Those of you who are not aware, we have a forum. You can go to our website, as we mentioned before, and go along the top. There's a place where you can navigate to it. It's a whole bunch of other people who are taking their own health, taking charge of their own health, taking their health into their own hands, learning what they need to learn, and contributing with each other, sharing with each other. And that's the best way to learn. It really is. Dave Murphy gave your PrevMed YouTube info to a guy yesterday with heart issues. Told him if he's not happy with current treatment and wants to prevent as well as treat, check you out. Thank you so much, Dave. You know, again, that's what this is all about. There's just not a lot of prevention guys out there. I used to be in the business of training them when I was at Hopkins, and prevention just doesn't pay a doctor very much, and it's not very exciting. Back in the old days, it used to make a bureaucrat out of you. It still makes you a little bit of a bureaucrat. I've spent my time, we used to call it with bureaucrat butt, sitting in meetings for way too long, because we're managing health in large populations rather so much than one individual at the time. But there's prevention for one individual at a time as well, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Dave Murphy, okay. So thank you again, Dave. Alex Alonzo, good morning. How are you guys? Good morning, Robert Simpson. We just had a big jump. James Cantor had a nasal swab COVID test as part of a checkup. Negative. Congratulations to you. And if you talk to most of our viewership, most of us are over half of us are baby boomers, and a lot of us are, quote, retired, at least financially able to retire, or at least doing a lot of work at a point in our careers where we can work out of home, like myself. So that makes it a lot easier. As you may know, I'm doing a lot of work with helping large companies get their employees back to work. And for the younger generation, for a lot of folks, this is not so easy. There was a great article recently about the meat packing industry. I mean, these folks do not have the option of working from home. And it has been a nightmare for those guys. Glauco Delevidov. That sounds maybe Eastern European or Russian. Thank you for shedding light over this very important subject. Thank you so much, Glauco, for acknowledging it. And leave us a comment. Tell us where you're from, or tell us the background, the ethnic origin. My BJJ, I'm pre-diabetic. Fasting glucose ranges from 95 to 110. That's not great. And yes, you are pre-diabetic. What you want, optimum, for those of you who don't know, is 90 or below for fasting glucose. I brought my A1C down to 5% by eating less than 100 carbs per day. Excellent. That's very good. I saw a patient yesterday who's done well. He's lost 20 pounds just by dropping his carbs down to 100 per day, but you can tell by looking at his HDL, his triglycerides over HDL, his continued glucose bioindicators, his cardiovascular inflammatory markers. He still needs to drop it below there. And that's one of the major things that we talked about. Huge improvement on 100 grams. Now maybe think about going to more like 50. Anyway, back to my BJJ. He or she has gone to less than 100 per day, and that's keeping the glucose under 120 post-meal. That's excellent. That is really, really good. I'm considering metformin. Any thoughts? Yes, I have that conversation with a lot of people. And just like everything else, there's pros and there's cons. If you haven't seen our videos, we've got a couple of them on TAME, the TAME study, targeting aging with metformin. Take a look, check it out. The targeting aging with metformin, the quote PI, principal investigator, is a fellow named Nir Barzilai, physician at Albert Einstein in New York. The reality is Dr. Barzilai really didn't develop the study so much as the National Institutes of Aging. The gerontologists there said, look, we know that the vast majority of problems associated with what we have known to be, quote, normal aging, end quote, are really prediabetes. So if that's the case, maybe we ought to just put metformin in the water. And that's basically the TAME study design. They don't put it in the water, but they say, once you reach a certain age, you go on metformin or the placebo. And that's what they're looking at. They got hung up in that study for years because the NIH couldn't fund it because of regulation. The NIH regulation says, quote, normal aging is not a disease. So we can't do funding of things to look at normal aging. So that's obviously been a frustration. Now, that helps. The whole point behind that story, BJJ, is to help underline the importance and focus point for metformin. It's like the conversation I was having with the patient I mentioned from yesterday. You know, then the next question comes in is, what does metformin do? Well, metformin, we know, tends to slow down the body's gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, genesis meaning make. So the liver makes new glucose and puts it into the bloodstream. As we get insulin resistant, our body sensors in our brain become more accustomed to having high levels of glucose. So when those when yours gets down to 90, for example, my BJJ, your sensors have started to say, that's too low. We're used to it being higher. So the sensors are saying, okay, they go to the liver and tell your liver, they pump out a little cortisol or some other hormones to make your liver start producing sugar to dump into the bloodstream. Well, that's why you're getting these higher fasting glucose numbers. Again, they're fasting. That's sugar that's being created by your liver. Now, how do you slow? So the bottom line is, with prediabetes, your body's engine begins to run too hot, and the sensors for that glucose metabolism, again, get accustomed to it and get accustomed to running your body too hot. You need to get into a position where you start slowing down not only the postprandial or post-meal glucose, but also that early morning glucose. Metformin helps in that area. I could have just said that, but again, wanted to provide a little bit more explanation around it. Thank you very much. A super chat. For those of you who don't know how to do those, we've got information up in this upper, I think that's going to be right-hand corner as you look at it, maybe left-hand corner. Thank you, BJJ. And I hope that's helpful. There's some other things, there's some other people would say, well, metformin, if you look it up on Mayo Clinic website, Mayo Clinic would say, oh, metformin has the risk of metabolic acidosis. That's not true. I've got some challenges. Mayo Clinic's a great place, but their website has a lot of misinformation. Not so much dangerous misinformation, unless you would say, okay, well, some of their negative comments about metformin might create problems and risk when people should have been taking it and they didn't because of the website. So, you can debate anything. The bottom line is there have been not one but two Cochrane meta-analyses showing that you don't get formic acid or metabolic acidosis from metformin. There are other people that would say, well, it does some damage to mitochondrial function. You can see that with Rhonda Patrick and some others. I think there's some validity to that. I think the biggest issue, though, is for those of us who do like a 1 or 2 day extended fast, if you're taking things like metformin at the same time, you need to be careful. You can get hypoglycemic. So those are just all some of the pros and cons to be thinking about in terms of metformin. I hope that was helpful, BJJ. Mike Doe's, Lugol's iodine. Thanks, but I'm not sure where that's coming from. Joe gave a little super chat for $1.99. Thank you so much, Joe. Again, folks, we have a team of folks outsourced that from a totally different economy, the Philippines, and even though something may seem like not too big of a contribution on the American side, it's a big contribution on the Filipino side. Dave Murphy, at my BJJ, it appears to be working for me. So Dave's on metformin and sharing that with you. And I take it too. I did have some problems early on in terms of maybe working too hard with some hard cycling at the same time that I was doing some 2 day fasts, at the same time that I was doing carb restriction, which I'm still doing, at the same time that I was taking metformin. Be careful about mixing all of those together. That's the biggest risk. And then if you think about the Rhonda Patrick, David Sinclair questions about mitochondrial performance, to me, what I started doing was just taking metformin 4 or 5 days a week and not taking it during that time period. Is that scientifically founded? No, there's not a lot of evidence around that. James Cantor at BJJ, metformin ER 500 milligrams twice a day helps me. Yep. Most of our folks, or most of my patients, are actually taking 500 twice a day. Most of them are not taking the extended release. It's much more expensive. Some people do require it. And one of the more common reasons for it is trying to manage that fasting glucose, that fasting that dawn effect. James Cantor, with diet and exercise, metformin does help. I would agree. There's a reason why it is the most commonly given drug for, and the first line drug for diabetes and even prediabetes. There's good reasons for it. I take it, I recommend it, and folks, well, maybe enough said. Joe Riley, my BJJ, intermittent fasting and 24-hour fast once or twice a week. Thank you, Joe. Dave Murphy, super chat. Thank you so much, Dave. $5. Thanks for all your hard work, both for me personally and for the information you provide us. Thank you again, Dave. That's, you know, we get a lot of feedback that we're saving lives. We know that we are, both in terms of the patients we see and especially in terms of making this information available. And that appreciation just makes all the difference in the world. It really does. Glauco Delevidov, have you heard about the Porto Feliz case? I have not. I can send you the links later. Please do. I would appreciate it. And you're from Brazil. We've got a contingent from Brazil. A lot of good folks down there. Thanks so much for sharing. Dave Murphy, is there an advantage to ER metformin over regular? So as I said, it's the advantage is usually, there's a couple of things. The vast majority of people, as in 95%, don't need it. And I would tell you, you know, the regular metformin, they almost give away with a zero copay and actually $3 or $4. They give it away. It's very, very cheap. Pharmacies give it away to help people decide to come to their pharmacy to advertise their other drugs. But on the other hand, metformin is also notorious for being one of the most expensive drugs in the pharmacy world. Why is that? Well, because of this ER thing. Some of the ER preparations, they have figured out a way to make it extremely expensive. And for guys like me that have managed pharmacy spend for, you know, large companies like Toyota, that's one of the areas where you have to go in and just make sure that you're not getting taken to the cleaners. The pharmacy world used to be what many of us, you know, called one of those local rug markets. This is usually $10, but for you, my friend, 500. You know, that sort of thing. Pharmacy is rife with a lot of that kind of inappropriate stuff, and it's not so bad as it used to be, but it's still a significant problem. And these ER metformin preparations are one of the places where that happens. As I mentioned, the people that do need them usually have one of two problems. One, it's dawn effect, and they get a little bit better coverage in that morning. And number two, it's some of them get fewer GI problems with it. Most folks don't have GI problems at all with metformin, but some do. The other thing I would say is that most people that get really focused on this dawn effect, I'm very skeptical that they're actually having a real problem. It's just more that they're focused on it. As you saw from BJJ's note earlier, the number he or she is getting is like 90 to 105, and really 90 to 105 is not likely to be a dangerous level. It's not going to, you know, it's clearly not dangerous like, you know, 2 hours postprandial at 180 or 200, 250, or even 160. So again, you have to think of a lot of things in terms of managing this. James Cantor, Dave Murphy, less stomach upset with yeah, I should have just skipped on over to your statement, James. Less stomach upset, metformin ER. Otherwise, the endocrinologist says that same overall effect, but does not lower sugar as fast after a meal. Is normal aging really normal? That's the point. That's why I keep putting it in quotation marks. Thank you for responding to that. If it can be addressed and or treated or slowed down. That's the whole point. That's exactly what I'm doing for a living as a retiree. Maybe someone should point that out to the to the NIH. Wouldn't that be nice? Dave Murphy, will the elevated BG with hard exercise ever slow down? or is it just part of the normal process? That goes up and down. I think what Dave is referring to is that, especially if you use something like a Freestyle Libre, most of us will get a lowering of blood sugar as we start into exercise. But then once you get into intense exercise, sometimes it can start peaking again. And when that happens, it's really often related to cortisol and epinephrine. And those both cause that liver to start releasing blood sugar again. Some people just get it every time. Some people get it sometimes. And some people go from not I'm one of these people that I never had it until about a year ago. And then I started developing more of this. Once I got into an intense level of exercise, my blood sugar would start going up again. It's just totally unpredictable, Dave. It's a great question. Thanks for pointing it out. Ashley Percival, poor analysis. I'm not sure what you're talking about. My exercise elevates my blood glucose during the exercise, but drops within a few minutes afterwards. And Bob, thank you for sharing that. I didn't mention that. That's the most common thing that happens. I do not, and I don't worry about having a short-term elevation related to exercise for the reason that you're talking about. And we know from, there's just way too much evidence out there showing that exercise is healthy for you, it's good for you, and we know that a lot of people have had hyperglycemia for short time periods during exercise. Again, not something I'm worried about. Bob Bell, muscles are calling for blood glucose, and liver's probably accommodating that during exercise. That's exactly what's going on. BJJ, thank you for your great answer to my question, Dr. Brewer. Very helpful. I also am reading Jenny Rule's book, Blood Sugar 101, per your recommendation. Thank you so much, BJJ. And yes, it's a great book. Thank you for mentioning it. Just 1 hour, read the first 30 to 90 pages, and you get a whole different view of hyperglycemia and blood sugar. Thanks for mentioning it. Jenny Rule, JENNRUHL. Jenny Rule, Blood Sugar 101. Dave Murphy, thanks, James Cantor. Dr. Brewer, my metformin ER has a low copay from Blue Cross Blue Shield, like $4 a month. I agree. Most of them are, James. It's just, again, from somebody who's managed pharmacy spend for decades. It's just it's weird. I remember the first time I saw that, I thought, this is metformin. Even ER metformin's been around for decades. How could they do that? And my perspective is it's less than ethical. Managers and vendors in that space are taking advantage of market niche problems, asymmetric knowledge. In other words, somebody has some knowledge, they have some, the pharmacy purchaser doesn't know that, and they're just very, very frustrating. Again, it does not have to be expensive. It doesn't. Most of it isn't. Even most of the ER isn't. It's just something you have to be careful for. Bob Bell, my metformin copay is $6 per month on Medicare Advantage. Good. ER, thank you. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Pardon me if I went down that space, that bunny hole, too long. It's just one of those frustrating things about medicine. Tom Smith, do you have any experience with LDN, low dose naltrexone? I don't. I know that Richard Bernstein was talking about it. He used it a good bit. And I actually did some videos on it at one point. It sounds like a great option for some people. I offered it for a while, and I just didn't get any takers. Naltrexone's got well, I won't go down that bunny hole, but thanks for raising it. Naltrexone, low-dose naltrexone does appear to be a good option for some people. If we have more interest in it, let me know. Dave Murphy, my first thing, morning numbers this morning, best in a long time. Blood glucose 75, ketones 2.6. That's very good. 60 plus hours fasted. Well, you know, that's where that comes from. 500 milligrams metformin BIT until the fast started, BID. So very good, very helpful. Thank you for sharing, Dave. And thanks to the rest of you for your interest.